And one of the first things I want to do is talk a little bit about the men and women that we have in uniform today. I'm incredibly privileged to represent almost 2 million soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are on active duty today. It's a typical day. There's about 275,000 of them that are forward in 177 different countries, and they're doing everything from combat operations in Iraq and Syria to protecting our cyberspace and everything in between. You know, I am nonpartisan, apolitical. It's been a political year, and it's been, you know, some things have been said this year that I feel, as a senior uniformed officer, obligated whenever I speak in public to make something clear. And that is that the men and women that we have in uniform today are capable of protecting the homeland and our way of life. They can meet all of our alliance responsibilities, and they have a competitive advantage over any potential adversary in the world. Of that, I am absolutely confident. We are recruiting and retaining incredibly high-quality people, and they are on a day-to-day basis, I hope, making you proud. Having said that, you know, there are some challenges, and when you, in fact, I talked to at least one person who has insomnia and watched C-SPAN, but when you watch the leadership in Washington on C-SPAN and we talk about readiness, we do talk about the challenges. We've been at war for 15 years, and our people are running incredibly hard. Many of them still today are on what we say is a 1-to-1 deployment to dwell ratio, and what that really means is you're gone as much as you're home. So whether you are gone for 7 months at a time or 12 months at a time, you're gone for 7 months, you're home for 7 months, you're back out for 7 months. I visited just about a month ago now the USS Barry. It's one of our destroyers out in the Pacific. It's in Yokosuka, Japan. And that ship over the past year has been at sea 70% of the time. And for those of you that are sailors, you know what you do in the 30% of the time that you're not at sea. You're training and you're maintaining and you're getting ready to go back out to sea. So they're running pretty hard. And I could talk about some of our folks that fly, some of our intelligence people. I met some personnel recovery folks in the Air Force. I got them all in a small school circle. I said, hey, how long is this deployment? They said 4 months. I said, how long were you home before this deployment? They said 4 months. I said, what about before that? We were on a 4-month deployment. And they're doing that on a routine basis. In addition to just running hard, our equipment, airplanes, our vehicles, our weapons have all been used at a greater rate than we predicted. And so, you know, we're seeing some signs of wear and tear in that regard. And that has been exacerbated a bit because of the unsteady budget situation we've been in over the last 3 or 4 years. So I guess my summary for you is that, yes, we do have some challenges. Yes, those challenges are out in public. One reason why I'm always aggressive in talking about our challenges is I don't want our young men and women to be in a fair fight. That's not the deal. If you're part of the United States military, you're not going to be in a fair fight. We want them to have a competitive advantage. So when we go up to Congress, we, with all candor, share the challenges that we have in an effort to articulate a requirement for additional resources so our young men and women have, in fact, the very best equipment, the very best training, and the very best leadership to be able to accomplish any mission. But I wouldn't want any of you to believe that there's anything other than high-quality people in the force today and an ability to do the job. And as I'll speak about a little bit in a minute, my concern is not with 2016 and 2017. I can say to you with confidence that we have that competitive advantage I spoke about. My concern is that the individual who might be in my job in 2021 or 22 can say it with the same degree of confidence that I say it to you today, that we have a competitive advantage. You know, we have a tendency to look at ourselves as either at peace or at war. And that model is very different than what China, Iran, or Russia, as the case may be, looks at. And I'll give you an example with Russia. Russia combines economic coercion, political influence, information operations, unconventional operations, military capability and posture to advance their interests on a day-to-day basis. They employ capabilities, they conduct activities that we would associate with conflict. And so I think as we look to the future, and I'm talking now just with the military dimension of what is actually a much broader problem. It's not a military problem. There is a military dimension to the problem. But this issue of adversarial conflict in dealing with Russia, Iran, and China on a day-to-day basis is something that we have to refocus on and is a key area of interest for us. The other thing I would tell you is that conflict today is much more likely to be trans-regional, multi-domain, that is in land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. and multifunctional. And that sounds like a lot of Washington, D.C. words, but what it really means is that, you know, in the 1990s, you could have imagined most conflicts. We had a regional strategy, and you could imagine most conflicts, we would have tried to isolate them to a particular region. And I'll use North Korea as an example. In the 1990s, you know, our response to a conflict on the Korean Peninsula would have been a land supported by maritime and air forces to either restore the 38th parallel in the Korean Peninsula or remove the regime in North Korea. North Korea then developed ballistic missile capability, and it became more of a regional challenge than just an isolated challenge to the peninsula. Today, when you look at North Korea and you look at the possession of intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as those ballistic missiles that can strike in the region, you look at their cyber capabilities and a nascent space capability, immediately a conflict on the Korean Peninsula also poses a threat to the homeland and to other regional actors. And the time and space associated with conflict today is much different, which makes the decision-making, in my judgment, and we have at least one former Secretary of State and a Secretary of Defense here. Secretary Perry, sir, good to see you. I didn't see you when I first came in. But we have individuals here that have experience in Washington, D.C. in making decisions, and I would argue that the decision-making space that our leadership has today as a result of the character of war today is very much different. All of which argues for a greater degree of global integration in both our planning and our execution, and that's another area of particular interest. With that kind of as a scene setter, just again to give you, from my perspective, the major challenges we face, with the caveat that that is really a planning construct in a way to inform us as to where we are today relative to where we need to be in building a joint force. And not by any means a predictor. My assessment is that if we prepare for those 4+1, and we have an inventory of joint capabilities and capacities that give us the ability to deal with those 4+1, those 4 state challenges and 1 non-state challenge, then we will have the kind of joint force necessary to deal with what most assuredly we will have to deal with in the future, and that is unpredictability.
So we contacted the commanding officer of the 26th MAU, Colonel Mike Myatt. For this exercise with JSOC, Colonel Myatt said we had the best company commander we could find to plan and execute such a high-profile raid. Captain Joe Dunford was the raid commander. It appears Captain Dunford has a great career ahead of him.
Our strategy as a nation to deal with the Islamic State has 9 lines of effort, and only two are led by the Department of Defense. And what can we do militarily? We can degrade the Islamic State's military capability, and we have been doing that. We can disrupt their ability, and this is our #1 priority, we can disrupt their ability to plan and conduct operations against the United States or our allies. But we can't deal a lasting defeat to the Islamic State until we get after the underlying conditions that feed radical extremism. And so what you can expect to see in the coming months is, I believe we'll be successful in seizing Raqqa. I believe we'll be successful in isolating and eventually seizing Mosul. And that will eliminate what we call the physical caliphate, in the sense that we'll no longer be able to declare that they have a proto-state. But my expectation is they'll continue to conduct terrorist operations, they'll continue to conduct guerrilla operations in the Middle East, and certainly the narrative will still be alive, and they'll increasingly rely on what we call a virtual state, which is in the information space to again, radicalize youth around the world. I do believe, as I mentioned in my opening comments, that our success on the ground is one of the best ways to undermine the credibility of the narrative, and we have seen that their brand of extremism has become a lot less seductive to youth around the world in the last few months as a result of the losses that they've experienced on the battlefield. But you know, it has taken us a long time to get to this point. When we went back into Iraq, we had to redevelop our intelligence network. The Iraqi security forces required a lot of work. For many of you who are in this room who work with the Iraqi security forces prior to 2011, we did a lot of work, and frankly, the political leadership squandered much of that, and we had to rebuild that capability. But today, in my judgment, the Iraqi security forces are getting to the point, and certainly the Kurds, the same thing, are getting to the point where they have a competitive advantage over the Islamic State. A little more difficult in Syria in the sense that the partners that are working on the ground are not as capable as the Iraqi security forces, so we're still working through that. But the only other point that I would make to this group is that You know, the challenges that we have today in Iraq and Syria are beginning to be a lot more about the political challenges and what I describe as the day after Mosul or the day after Raqqa, far more so than just the physical act of retaking ground away. We have limited their freedom of movement. We have taken away their territory. We have eliminated many of their resources, but there are political challenges both in Iraq and Syria that are going to have to be addressed in order for those two countries not to be a sanctuary from which violent extremism emanates. We increased our investment in space resilience. We increased our capabilities in cyberspace, electronic warfare, and some of the other areas that weren't necessarily pressing as we focused on the challenges of Iraq and Afghanistan. But again, if you look at things through the lens of the 4+1 and you say you have to have balanced capabilities, those are areas where we were out of balance and we need to kind of adjust. So I think the two areas that you address are really the human factors piece is one where I think some rebalancing needs to take place, and all the service chiefs are working pretty hard on that to come up with, what I call a sustained rate of fire, right? I mean, if those of us that are infantrymen, if you use a machine gun at the cyclic rate, you quickly burn out the barrel, and that's why you have the sustained rate of fire. And I think the force has been running pretty hard, if not cyclic, at the rapid rate here over the last few years, and we've got to settle that down a little bit. And then we also, again, have to start making investments informed by both what we need today and what we need tomorrow.